Okay, welcome everybody. It's 2:00, so why don't we get started? I'd like to call the meeting to order. Trudy, can you please do the roll?
Swanson,
Here.
Zibble,
Here.
McNamee. Sheets.
Here. Thank you. Can we stand for the pledge, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you for that. And Mr. Zibble, would you mind reading our mission statement?
Not at all. I appreciate, like to do that. Laketran mission statement. Laketran is committed to providing quality public transportation services to all Lake County residents with special emphasis on meeting the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities.
Thank you.
Need Ben.
First off,
I'm sorry, say again.
There's a device that helps hear and it's at our room support.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Do we have any public comments? We do not. Seeing none. We'll move on to approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the November 21st meeting? Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Trudy, can you call the roll, please?
Sheets,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yeah.
Zibble.
Yes.
Do I still need to call you being?
Yes. We're confused because we're going in opposite directions. The first one was from alphabetically back and now we're going alphabetically forward.
Yes.
So we're having a hard time keeping up with you. Okay, so the action item today, primary one, we actually have two that we're going to need to get at. We're being asked to consider recommending the award of the headquarters renovation and expansion construction contract to the lowest and best bidder by the Board of Trustee at our January 2023 meeting, excuse me. We all got the recommendation briefing paper. I thought maybe, Bill, we might start with some observations from you, if that's all right.
That'd be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, appreciate you having me here. Obviously, good opportunity to present where we are at the project. As requested, our job is to make sure we're shepherding this job through the process, going through the public bid process. We had a pre-bid meeting in which we had a good number of unions showing up. I have to say that. Good number of general trades contractors or really construction managers. And then we had a number of subcontractors that were here to look at the site. We also had a follow-up walkthrough in which we had 11 other companies coming through a second time to get additional information. So we think the project was well reviewed, well covered, and obviously an interesting project for a lot of people to be involved in. We unfortunately, the downside is we tracked each and every one of these construction managers who are acting as general trades contractors, and unfortunately watched them drop off one by one by one. I talked to everyone that was at the pre-bid meeting. I have a lot of bad reasons, nothing that I'm going to give to the board today, but we did have one quality contractor submit a bid. I did have some discussions with them twice during the bidding process, and obviously they were intent on submitting a bid on day one, and that is Ozone Construction. A big construction manager, but also willing to do general trades work. So we're happy about that. As you see in front of you, the bids that were received are underneath the architect's estimate and also underneath the cost for the alternates. And based on that, we're here to recommend that all bids and alternates be accepted by the committee and recommended for approval by the board. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you for that. Any questions for Mr. Gallagher?
Just a couple of quick questions. The people that came through on the second go through, were they people that were dropped off the bids, or is it part of Lausanne's group?
It was primarily subcontractors that were trying to get more detail on some of the information. We
Okay,
did receive a number of requests for information. They were all tracked and obviously identified in the addendums that went out, but it was mostly the subcontractors that came through, which were people that were not even at the initial pre-bid.
okay,
It was a mandatory pre-bid, so we did not allow any other contractors to submit bids if you weren't at the initial
gotcha.
mandatory pre-bid.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, would you share with the rest of us your observations of why we only got one bid?
I did start off saying that I have a lot of bad reasons from each and every contractor. I prefer not to go into that kind of detail because they all did not mean much of anything. In my opinion, this is a tough job. This is a long-term job, and people that didn't have the wherewithal to accommodate and bond this project and or have the resources to have someone on project for 2 years, and even more importantly, didn't want to put up with, really, it's like 4 separate small projects. It's not like one big school where everyone's building continuously. It's stop and go and stop and go and stop and go. So my feeling is there were just not enough ability to service this properly. So some of the larger contractors decided to not go after it. But I'm very thankful that Ozan thought it was a great job and it fit their business model, and they're excited about doing it.
For purposes of us understanding a little bit, can you give us some background on Ozan? Let us know a little bit more about them.
Ozan Construction is a large construction management organization. They were known for a large minority-owned company, probably one of the largest in the state, if not in northeastern United States. They are initially were part of the consortium that was doing the Cleveland Metropolitan School District work. And that was over $750 million worth of construction. They were part of the original organization that teamed together to do construction management on those projects. They're probably as large as any other construction management companies. I don't have the actual annual revenues, but they are used to doing large projects, complicated projects, and have a large team of project managers and construction inspectors and obviously office staff to help put this project together.
Great, thank you. Any other questions at this point? Okay, Andrea, do you have any comments for us regarding the bid package itself?
Yeah, so we have, and as I'm sure as you all know, a number of required forms that are required in order to be responsive as a proposer or bidder. I reviewed all the paperwork. Everything was done to perfection. It was one of the cleaner bids that I've seen, in my role here. So they definitely meet all of the responsiveness criteria. Additionally, we make sure that they're not like disbarred from participating in federally funded jobs or state funded jobs, and they meet that requirement as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments for or against any discussion that we should hold at this point?
Do you want to go over the contingency stuff or any of that?
Yeah, I'll bring that up.
Separate, okay.
Right. No, I take it everybody's.
I'm fine.
Okay, then I think one area that we do need to talk a little bit about is the, well, I guess we're all comfortable with going to the suggested alternatives. At least I haven't heard anybody say that they're uncomfortable with it yet. But I do want to have a little bit of a discussion regarding the FF&E and the project contingency funding. We talked about I guess a 10% contingency in this, which seems to me a little bit high. And I was just wondering if we can talk a little bit about that. Would that be a typical contingency amount in this kind of a project? Where would they range from? What would be the lower end and what would be the upper end?
Okay. First of all, it's an average. Is it typical? Yes. Could it be lower or higher? Yeah. You see 8 to 12% on renovation. On new construction, it's much easier. It's all new starts. You can see everything that's in front of you. When you open something up, it's going to be brand spanking new when you put it together. When you're doing renovation, there's always chance that we're going to find unforeseen conditions. We did a very good job of vetting everything with Ozan and the architect earlier in the week. And we think we asked them all the right questions and they gave us all the right answers. We think we have everything addressed, but you just never know. As soon as you open up a wall and then you find that there's a 4-inch vent line in there that's accommodates all your plumbing throughout the building, you're not going to take that out of service. And the real challenge we have is the duration here. We want to make sure we don't have any long pauses because we have to make 3 or 4 different swing spaces available so that we can start the next phase of the project. So the contingency gives us the ability to make decisions in the field, get a adequate price, or I should say well-vetted price, obviously take that back to the administration and allow us to get that service taken care of. That can be done usually within a week. Otherwise, we could lose till the next board meeting, which could be as much as 30 days. And then we're going to lose that month for probably advancing projects. So we would say, going back to your initial question, somewhere between 8 and 12% would be something that would be reasonable amount for renovation of renovation project.
Okay. So I've gotten some feedback from a couple of the other board members that they're a little uncomfortable with that amount. And essentially the discomfort comes from, we're talking upwards of almost $2 million that sort of floats, if you will, in terms of, is it going to be used? Is it not going to be used? And what role should the board play or not play in that process? And obviously, I think we all understand the tension of having to move the project forward on a timely basis. The counter to that is the concern of several members of the board that's been expressed to me that we're blind on that point, and we find out sort of after the fact that things have occurred and we've had no input to it. So is there a way to balance those tensions? Is there a process that allows the board some understanding for lack of a better term, in real time, as opposed to finding out at a board meeting 3 weeks later or 4 weeks later?
We can expose everything that we are going through at the same time. There's a software program that's provided by the general trades contractor. It's Nuforma, or it could be Procore. I think we're going back and forth on the actual one. But anytime there's a change in the contract documents for unforeseen conditions and or convenience and or to help the project move along faster, and I can give you several possible things that we have to consider, mostly weather-related considerations right now. But that request is made. It's going to be reviewed by the architect. It's going to be reviewed by their engineers. It's going to be reviewed by CT consultants. At that time, a recommendation is going to be made. So there's actually 3 different times where people are touching this. Again, my suggestion would be have this staff be involved in the administering of these processes and find a third-party resource that you can use to allow the board to review these. What I would still recommend is give the comments back to administrative staff and allow him or her to make the decision if this is approved or not based on our recommendation. I wouldn't want to wait till a board meeting, which I agree with. That would be much too late on some of the simplest projects, potential issues. But on the larger ones, if the committee prefers, we can gladly bring them to the board to discuss.
So what would be and I know this is impossible to answer, particularly in a complex project like what we're talking about here, but what would be the sort of the range of a change in a work order, which would call for a contingency release? You know, I would assume that they're relatively modest, and major ones, I would assume, would get a much more daylight shown on them. Am I asking that?
Let me say it a different way. I think the change orders are going to be very few, but there could be an opportunity for having something, I wouldn't say major, but in the $50,000 range. And I'm saying is soil conditions. We know that there's a lot of wetlands back there, even though we're supposedly out of wetlands, even though it looks like it's good material, but when we start cutting the excavations, if we start getting into a lot of silt and other materials, we're going to have to probably haul some of that out. And unfortunately, it's going to be hauled out probably worst case scenario in the wintertime or in the spring when it's raining. And at that time, yes, we could allow materials to dry out and then reinstall them, or else we may just say we can't stop this project. We need to bring in new materials. But those are decisions that we can make as a committee. And those are decisions that if you think when it comes to something that's large, we will want complete buy-in from the committee and the board.
Well, to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that the committee itself knows what its limits would be to be involved in that, because we really haven't had that discussion at the board level. You know, so I'm not sure that we could say, yes, it should be us. But I would expect we'd end up with something like that if that was the concern, but we have not had the full board discussion regarding that. So I guess that's going to take a little shaping at a full board meeting to have that discussion, unless I missed something.
I just wanted to comment that from my perspective, I think it could come before the committee and then a recommendation is taken to the full board, as opposed to having that kind of detailed discussion at a full board meeting. Just an alternate thought.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that, Don, except what we don't want to end up with, I don't think, under any condition, is where the project has come to a halt and we're 3 weeks away from a board meeting. You know, so the mechanism has to allow some expeditious response. And I don't exactly know what that is, but you know, I don't think the board, this is my own opinion, but I don't think the board should find itself being because of procedure, the holdup on the project.
Sounds like we got to figure out a hybrid approach.
Right. Yeah, I agree. We don't want to be the group that's holding everything up and the contractor comes back and says, well, I've got a problem because you sat on a decision for 3 weeks or whatever it was. I mean, I don't think any board member wants that to be the issue. I think it's more a matter of the board hopes not to be surprised. So at least that's the feedback that I'm getting.
Gary, Bill has indicated that the 8 to 12% is probably a good range. So averaging it to 10% probably is not a bad place to be starting at in terms of that. I think from what I've also heard, there's going to be a continuous program of monitoring of where the change orders are, what the status is, what the amounts are going to be, and everything like that. And I certainly would expect, if not Bill, then Ben would be making a presentation at each of the board meetings to say, here's where we're at on the project. This is a change that has occurred, or this is a credit that has occurred, and we could see that. if the board is, if your concerns are more focused on the size of a change order, I think the larger change orders would probably take a little bit more time to develop anyway. So there would be a little bit of time to at least let us be informed of those before they're signed off on. I mean, if the bill mentioned the one about the soils, if that were a $1 and $50,000 was the amount on that, that's not going to be something I would think that would be approved maybe in a week. It probably would take a couple of weeks really for you to do the engineering on it and things like that. So I think there's time in there for Ben to get some information out to us to say, this is what's going on with it, and we could give some feedback to him on that. And then on the monthly basis, we certainly would see where we're at on the overall change order contingency budget as to whether or not we're getting close to it. And I think maybe some of the concern is, okay, what's the $2 million going to be spent for? Is it something that's not in the specifications that needs to be done, or is it something in the specifications that by happen chance wants to be changed? That's not going to happen because the specs are there. This is what has to be put in the building. So that's all those decisions have been made ahead of time. I think the one example that we had would have been on the Laketran facility where the charging station just totally wasn't being manufactured anymore. So we had to change manufacturers. That had to come back and be a pretty good sized change order for that. That's an unusual type situation, I think. So to me, there's methods of monitoring it and the progress going through it. And certainly I think there's time in change order type schedules to make sure that the board is aware if it's a large one. And how do you define what a large one is?
Exactly. Is $50,000, is that material in a $2 million potential budget?
Yeah.
For contingency? I don't know, nobody that in my conversations, nobody said, I think it ought to be $75,000 and above, or, it's just, how are we going to be aware of it is more the issue.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I guess that'll be something that we'll have to have a discussion with the full board so everybody can weigh in on it.
Okay.
All right.
I don't know why we're talking about the board, because according to this, the board has nothing to do with these change orders. It says it's approved by the owner's rep and Laketran staff. No mention of the board there at all.
That's how it was typed. It can be adjusted to whatever you guys would like.
Sorry.
That's how I typed it up because that's how we've done it for every other project. But if we want to do something else, it's up to you guys to decide.
Well, is the intent here to not have the board involved at all? I don't
Well,
understand.
I'm not sure what the involvement is there. I mean, we're going to be informed of what the change orders are, how the progress of the project is going forward. And if there's some big change thing that's going to happen, I would think Ben would make sure that we're aware of it. I don't think he's going to just go blindly through this whole thing. I mean, I would not recommend that he would go through it blindly without any feedback to the board.
I mean, for what we've done in the past, we keep, with CT and us, we keep a change order log that we look at all the time, and it has every add change order or deduct change order as we track the total amount of contingency available. And so in the past, that's been something that me and my team keep track of and manage. It seems loud and clear the board would like to have more visibility in that in this time. And I think that to Bill's point, some of that stuff is stuff that has to get taken care of. It can be the same day, like you can run into a plumbing issue or stuff, little things, but bigger things usually have time and planning associated with them before they happen. If the contractor asks for a $50,000 change order, it's not like hey, I opened a wall and found a thing I don't know what to do with. They have to figure out how much that price is also. So I think Ben's opinion would be that, you set a threshold at which the committee has a review process, and something like, I'm not sure, I'd ask Bill maybe about the dollar amount, but $25, $50, $75, $100,000, if it changes in that magnitude, I think then you'd have it discussed at the committee level. I'm not, I can certainly present the change order log monthly to the board without an issue at all. But I think if there's going to be any detailed discussion, this group might be the better place because they know the project better than the full board does. But that's Ben's opinion. I'm happy to do, whatever you guys want.
Well, I think that was clearly the intent when we started this, was that rather than have all these things bubble up to the full board, we've been, and that's actually number 2 on our issue to talk about today, and that's the subcommittee kind of ideas. Rather than have everything bubble all the way up to the full board, we compartmentalize to a certain extent and maintain some of these discussions at committee level, which would then be translated in a board meeting up to the full board. But we just haven't had, we haven't formalized that. So I think the board needs to have that discussion, which is actually a nice segue into our second session. But before we get there, we need to close this up. Any other comments?
The only thing I could add is I'm going to piggyback on what Ben just said. Every time we get requests for proposal, request for information, and we see that there's a change cost coming in, CT right away puts a placeholder in the log so that we know what our exposure is going to be. So we can always track the use of the contingency money. So at any given time, all the exposures should be obvious on this log. It'll show which ones have been approved and have been processed, and more importantly, which ones have been rejected because we didn't find it was a need for whatever the requested change was. So it's going to be very simple for the committee at any time to know where the money's at.
Good. Okay. Quick discussion on FF&E. Anybody have any comments on that?
That's a number that has been discussed and is satisfactory for all the things that the land and purchase.
I mean, this has been the number since the very beginning of the project. Just so everyone knows what FF&E is. This is things like furniture. There's a lot of maintenance components in ours, shelving and things like that. You have the option to put this in the contract with the general contractor and have him supply everything or her. You also have the option to do it outside of that. We elected to do it outside of that because we can buy virtually all of this off of state term pricing, state term contracts, which the contractor doesn't have access to. And then we also don't have to pay his markup on the items. So that's why it is sort of segregated in the approval list, because we didn't put it in the contractor's bid. And that was purely to save money. So it's definitely cheaper for us in this case to do it separate because we can buy off state term contract. Whereas like a private organization might put it in the contract because they don't want to deal with it. But since we can get the stuff for cheaper, we kept it separate.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Okay, well, I guess then we're at the point where we need to talk about the breakdown. We've got a base bid of $13,400,000. You are recommending that we go with both of the alternates, correct?
And just so you know, alternate 1A is for the masonry exterior. It is actually, I think, $440,000 additional money, but I think it's well spent. Probably as good of an insulation system as the metal panel, and it's maintenance free and much more durable. So yes, we definitely would say A1. A2 is replacing the concrete driveway into this site, and it's in need of repair. So we would say obviously both alternates should be accepted.
Okay, great. And then, of course, there's the contingency and the FF&E. And so that would bring us to a total of 21,864,000. And what was help me with this, numbers are eluding me as the years go by. What were we talking about in terms of total?
So this slide right here is the last estimate that was shared with the board. This was in November when the board asked to put it out to bid. So this is what we originally had planned for. We were originally planning for 24.5 million. We were going to have to spend a little bit more than 20% local match. So you can see that where it says local funds above local match. In this scenario, we actually don't have to do that. This is an exact 80-20 split. So we are spending the smallest amount of local dollars that we can in the project because of the bids coming in where they did. So I did have, this is what that split looks like. So our local funds is almost 4.4 million. But the rest of it, 80% is fully grant funded. And there's a number of different grants that make up that, including the larger one, the board is aware of, the $14 million one. There are some smaller ones we've been applying for over time that are included in that aggregate, but it is basically this, we would say this is a fully grant funded project because it's the full 80% grant dollars.
But it is accurate for us to say that the grant funding available is already in the bank account, correct?
It is. So you mean in the cash balance?
Right.
No, it is not. So grant funding for us is it's always a reimbursement. So we have to spend it first and then we get a check back from the feds.
Okay.
And that's true for anything we do, buses, buildings, anything.
Okay. Great. Any comments?
Yeah. I had one. Ben, if we were to look at this project and say, well, maybe we'll get a better deal 2 years from now or a year from now, how long do the grants last? We currently have.
I would want to check each one individually. The big one, I think we have, I'm looking at Andrea, we have some time.
Yeah, the large grant is, you get 3 years to obligate the funding. So, we're about at a year mark almost now since it was, awarded to us. So we would have about 2 more years to obligate the money.
That's the transportation grant that we got for 12 million or whatever. it
Yeah,
was.
that is our competitive bus and bus facilities grant, the 4.7 or 14.7 million. That's the large chunk of the grant funding. We have about 3 years to obligate that money. We were awarded the grant last March, so we're about a year into that funding.
Okay.
We had to delay the project longer than that. We can reapply to get that moved, can't we, if we needed to?
No, the funding expires. So we can obligate the money and then we have more time to utilize it, to actually spend it. But if we do not obligate the money, it expires and it goes back into the general appropriations for the country.
What do you mean by obligate?
Obligate means, so we've been awarded the money, but it is actually not even in our possession. It's not written in a grant with the FTA. So I wrote a competitive grant application. That money gets awarded. But I have to go through the process of telling FTA how we are spending that money. And that's the obligation process. And from the date of the award until September 30th, 3 years later, is the time period we have in which to tell FTA how we're going to spend it and put it in their grant system.
Well, if we were going to spend it for the same thing we're talking about now, doesn't that obligate it even if it's 3 years away?
I have not yet obligated the money, because it was indicated to me that the board was interested in waiting. But yes, I can obligate the money tomorrow. It's actually already pending. I have it drafted. And then we would have time to spend that money. We would have additional time.
So really, there's no drop dead date, so to speak, if we obligate the money.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Not sure I quite understand the point there where the obligation, we have a contract now, but if we say we didn't award this contract, then we don't have any obligation. We don't have any definitive reason for obligating the money.
So the grant process is we apply competitively for the dollars.
Yeah.
The feds say you win. Then we have to say thank you. And once we say thank you, that's when the funds are obligated.
Okay.
So there's 2 timers. There's the timer Andrea talked about is roughly 3 years between the award and when we say thank you and sort of make the money ours. after we make the money ours, there is not a written or scheduled timeline for how long we have to spend the money. It's a goofy system where the feds will, after a, 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 years, sometimes longer, will tell us, hey, when are you going to spend it? If you don't spend it by this date, we'll take it back. They don't usually make that comment until it's been a little while. So there's not like a set amount of time it takes, but it would be a while. If we said, if we collected this fund, if we said, thank you, we want the money, the amount of time between that and when we have to spend it is sort of variable, but it would be a while. Probably at least 6-7 years, I would think.
So as long as we're planning to do something with that money and we have a pretty good plan, then you can obligate the money and we have as much, not as much time, but we don't have this 3-year timeline resting on us. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. Let's obligate the money.
That would seem to make some sense, wouldn't it?
Pardon?
That would seem to make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Just like when we sold that property over on 306 here a few years ago. What did I tell you to do? Go get the check.
That's what we did. Yeah, we just waited to obligate. There's no like penalty or anything. We were just waiting to make sure that, the board got through its processes before we went and sort of said yes to it before the board had said yes to it.
Yeah, I think we understand that. There's been a bit of confusion around it, so probably made sense not to at this point. But Donna, did you have a comment earlier?
My question was answered in the discussion.
Okay. So one last thing, and we've touched on this on a number of occasions, but I just want to beat it into my brain one more time. This expansion meets what we believe to be our needs for the next couple decades, correct?
When me and my team sat down and wrote the original specifications for the architect and crafted the scope of work for them, our objective was a minimum of 30 years. This building has served us well for 30 years, and our intention was, there's going to be some maintenance we have to do to it in the foreseeable future for things, but major changes would be fully included in this project. So that we weren't going to be saying, hey, let's go add some space here later, let's make this tweak here. It would really be more of, once this is done, it'd be more of a maintenance mode, so that we weren't saying, hey, we need to add an office here or kind of whatever. So we spent a lot of time internally talking about the scope, making sure it met what we could see as our foreseeable future. That was with the assumption, and directed by me, that our financial situation would stay similar to what it is, and that the board or someone wouldn't say, let's go put another levy on the ballot and do another service expansion. So it did not include that type of thought process, because I didn't foresee a future where that was a direction we would go. So I didn't include that type of situation, but it should keep us well protected for 30 years based on what we're doing today.
Well, okay. So let me make sure I understand what you just said. Essentially what you're saying is, and we've talked a little bit about this, the graying of Lake County. That sort of organic growth ought to be relatively accommodated by what we're planning. But if we came back in and said we want 24/7 service, we probably would not have sufficient building resources for that. Is that correct?
That is correct. We looked at the levy in 19 and all the planning we did with that about, expanding the fleet to be able to accommodate those things and expanding the workforce to do that. We do have some extra, we accommodated a little bit of extra space here and there. Like I think there's 2 extra offices, maybe in a couple cube spots in case we add another person or something, but we would not be able to accommodate an incremental increase in service by, like, if we ask for more money.
Okay, so now let me go far afield a little bit. Is the Geauga County discussion, if that went forward, does that impact your thinking?
No. About this, no. It will always make sense. They will always have their facility that ODOT paid for, that they will primarily operate out of. Over time, we may have 1 or 2 people come here instead of working down there, which we have the ability to do. So that wasn't originally planned as part of the project, but it's not significant enough to cause a problem.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments or thoughts, questions? Well, I guess then we're at that point where we have to talk about making a motion, correct?
Yes.
Recommendation to the full board?
I would say that's correct, yes.
Okay.
I did my best to write one, but you can change it however you want.
Okay, so it's right there. Mr. Zibble, you're our reader, would you like to read that for us?
All right. I'd make the motion to as follows. This committee would recommend to the Board of Trustees for their approval, the resolution authorizing the CEO or designee to enter into a contract to be executed with Ozan Construction for the renovation and expansion of Laketran headquarters, including add alternate 1A, add alternate 2, furniture, fixtures, and equipment and construction contingency at a cost not to exceed $21,864,000.
I didn't even get the question out of my mouth. Okay, great. All right, all in favor? I guess we have to call a roll. I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm not used to this process.
McTomy. Yeah. Sheets,
Yes,
Swanson,
Yes,
Zibble.
Yes.
okay, thank you.
I just, thank you, committee. I know this was a lot of extra time for you guys, and I know from myself, the staff, we all appreciate the extra work that you guys did as board members to help us, shepherd this project along.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay, the next item for us to talk about is creation of committees. And Bill, you're certainly welcome to drag through this with us if you'd like, but you probably have other things you'd rather do.
I do. We're going to keep following up on this project first of all. So I'm going to go continue on with this to start getting everyone pre-order materials as quickly as possible, expecting the board.
Sounds great.
to approve everything.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bill.
Andre, if you want to, you don't need to stay. That's what you want to do. They were here in case of questions.
Get better. Zycam, take Zycam.
is this something we said?
Okay, so we were charged at the last board meeting, I believe. Kind of walked us into that one myself, I guess. We had a discussion about whether or not there should be maybe a creation of a couple committees that at some point in the past had existed, but had sort of gone dormant. And so we were tasked with perhaps having a discussion about whether or not we should think about resurrecting a committee model where the individual committees would do just what we're doing right here, do the sort of the heavy lifting in committee, and then loft up the sort of the outcome, if you will, to the full board. And I'll jump in here by saying that virtually every board that I've ever been involved in, which is a number, both nonprofit and for-profit, have always had committees because that is where the heavy lifting is done. And it's hard to expect every board member to be actively on top of all the actions going on everything that happens in a complex organization. And so the committee structure, I think, is fairly traditional. And from my perspective, is a fairly efficient way to get at it. So I would loft out there that the committee structure probably makes some sense. Are there any other comments?
As a veteran of this organization's board with a committee structure, I have done it with it and without it. Frankly, without it, without having committees, it's much more cumbersome. And ideally, I mean, we're not a large board, but effectively with two committees, the operations and budget and finances that existed, it was much more reasonable that essentially half the board was diving into a certain group of topics related to operations and another over the budget and finance issues. Occasionally there was overlap, but there was such a greater understanding of what occurred in this organization and across seating, if you will, among board members, that it made it so much easier to keep things moving in the organization and have people so much better informed and understanding what it is that goes on here when we're not sitting at this table. So I am very much in favor of that and would actually recommend that we go back to operations and budget and finance as our two standing committees and work from there.
Okay, now, would we, as a special projects committee, in your view, continue? Would that be a third, or would that disband and move into one of the other committees somehow?
Considering, and that's just my opinion, that the building project is so unique and has a separate set of issues and way we work together, I would like to see the special projects committee kept. And even if it, once the building project's done, that special projects committee is still out there to be activated as needed. There may be other issues that might come along, and we would have that as a special committee, literally, that would be able to work through on issues that are not more related to the day-to-day functioning of the organization.
I think we need to strike all those comments. Right? Either that or I need to step off the committee. That's a joke, Donna. That's just a joke. And I happen to agree with what you just said. I think what we're really talking about is two standing committees and then a special committee that would handle unique situations. So, yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Chuck, any thoughts on your end?
I looking at the bylaws that we have, there's no standing committees identified in the bylaws. So I mean, we're talking about changing some bylaws there to make those standing committees. I know that in this, there was the ability to create committees every year or based upon whatever the president wanted to do at that time. So that's how the operations and the financial ones got into place. But as my recollection, they never really got much traction with them. Personally, I think that committees should be established and have a defined purpose for them. And so that when that purpose is completed, really they're dissolved. Mm-hmm. And then if there's a need for something else, then there's another committee appointed. So that would just be a little bit of a personal preference on how it would be written up, I guess.
Excuse me, do I understand you correctly that you would not recommend having two standing committees and then establish other committees as needed or through the special projects?
I don't have a problem with having an operations and a financial ones. Some of the other things, I guess they would have, those wouldn't have to be written up and you could have a well-defined
Agree.
purpose for what those two committees are all about, and what they're supposed to be doing in that. And so I think that would be fine, but anything other than that, I think should be in more of an ad hoc type committee and appointed at the time of the need so that there can be a definition of what the purpose of that committee is for. Kind of gives you a timeline on it. So Gary's not hung out for the next 5 years to be in charge of the special projects committee.
I like that idea.
Well, if
But-
I could add, what occurred in the past was, January is technically our annual meeting where we elect a president and a vice president. And at that point in time, normally the president would ask the board if they were happy with their committee assignments, if they wanted to change. And also if the person chairing it was interested in continuing as chair. And once he heard from all of us, he would make the decision and act accordingly. That's how it worked. And as Mr. Zibble pointed out, whatever we decide to do really needs to go in the bylaws so that the structure is there for others to follow. And it doesn't look like whoever's chairman of this board has just dreamed this up as they go along.
Lane, any thoughts on your end?
No. I don't even know why we're having this conversation about committees.
Because we were charged at the last board meeting to have this discussion.
The only additional.
In this committee?
Yes. Yes, correct? Am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong.
No, I think there was my recollection was that there was a discussion about our committees needed. And the question was, Brian, I think, said, well, that's a perfect topic for the special projects committee to take up. So
Right.
I think it was intended to be discussed here from my recollection, but I would let anyone else know.
That was mine as well.
Mine as well.
And from my point, I would say it's outside the scope of what the special projects committee
I
is
don't
about.
care.
But Brian made the appointment and made the suggestion. So again, that's part of his prerogative, I think, as the president. So.
Well, I
So
guess I
think you're
don't,
right, Gary. This was a place that we could have that kind of discussion based upon last meeting.
I guess I don't recall it as clearly as you guys do. I didn't think that we were charged with that exactly. It was kind of a suggestion rather than a,
Well,
When-
without a committee structure, there was no place else for it to go.
Yeah.
We were it.
I mean, I don't care. I just was wondering why we're having this discussion.
Because it's on this piece of paper that we have to have this
Yeah, well,
discussion.
I can see that. And it's got your name on it too.
I can take it off the paper if
Well,
I move we delete 8A.
I guess part of the question for me with this discussion was really what type of standing committees would we want? What is the title of those? Then have somebody develop some type of a purpose that everybody would agree upon.
Right.
For those.
Right.
So again, if we have the financial and the operations committee, we need to write something, put it in the bylaws for those as being standing committees. And then we can go with the ad hocs or the special projects committees as they are in the bylaws now. Or add how many ever want.
I agree with
Yes,
that.
to you, Gary, yes, but a number of other boards I've been on, they've had a number of committees doing a lot of the work, but they were all pretty well defined
Right.
in the bylaws too. You know, so.
Well, and we've got a small board, so there can only be so many committees. So we're really, I haven't heard anybody suggest anything other than essentially what are the three potential committees that have been discussed here? Finance, operations, and an ad hoc special kind of committee. And you could call us an ad hoc if our role becomes one of staying on top of the building project for the whole board. We could become that ad hoc committee.
Right.
So, okay, well, to wrap this up, we could talk about this all day, I suppose. I guess what we'll loft back up to the full board then is that after a discussion, it would be our maybe
Recommendations, fine.
recommendation that we consider setting up a couple of standing committees.
Yes.
But, and there's a big but to this. We have to have full board cooperation on it and participation. There's no point in making committees if it's going to be a committee of one. I mean,
Exactly.
everybody's going to have to belly up to the bar and say, yeah, I will be an active part of this committee or whichever committee I get assigned to and or choose. I will participate. My understanding is that that was a bit of a problem in years gone by.
It was, the only point it was a problem was in 2003 going forward. And without going into it here, essentially, we just had a group of people who were not interested in doing that. They just refused to be on committees. So we ended up going to a committee of the whole, which essentially combined everything. And the week before the board meeting, we were sitting in 2-hour committee of the whole meetings, which to me was very inefficient.
Mhm.
It was like having 2 board meetings over the same topics a week apart.
Okay, well, so then that begs the question, do we have to make a motion to the full board, or can we just simply give them a report of our discussion? Okay. That's right. We're not allowed to do that. That's right. Okay, thank you.
One, is Mr. Chair, is okay, I had some.
Please.
One thing I think is going to be important to think about when you're thinking about the purpose is for us internally, how we know what needs to go where and how the board wants it sort of structured. So I know Brian, I proposed to Brian a while ago that if there committees are created that departments are essentially assigned to them. So that if, the operations committee, and this is Ben's thought, and it's obviously open for discussion, is, operations would be operations, maintenance, and IT, and then finance would be finance, compliance and development, HR, and procurement. And those, so that the thought process is any item that I had, and this could change, is any item coming to the board would go to a committee first and then to the board. And so that way we knew internally, like, hey, this is an operations item, it goes to the operations committee, and the committee would recommend that to the board. And something to keep in mind, this is not me trying to sway you one way or another, is that will delay everything by, 15 to 30 days as we go through the process, which is not a bad thing. It's just something to keep in mind. And so that also means that committee has to meet every month, right? Because we can't sort of plan sometimes we do, I think, a pretty good job with the 6-month look ahead of knowing what's coming, but there is stuff that comes up last minute that we just, it will come up, and I wouldn't want to bring it to the board last minute and not have it go through a committee because the committee hadn't planned. That may mean the committees end up canceling their meetings, but I would, in the thought process, I think it'll be important to say, this committee is going to meet every month. The board meets in my world in the beginning of the month. That way we can still put it on the board's agenda for later in the month. That's all up to change, but I just think it's good. There's a lot of mechanics to it that I think are important as you're talking about board commitments. Hey, if we're going to do committees, it's likely that this is an additional monthly meeting. And I don't want to say that to dissuade anyone. That's not my objective. It's just to think about that sort of process.
Well, you're touching on what I was going to kind of touch on here too, and the fact that sure, we can recommend that these 2 committees get done, but we should be having some follow-up discussion along with that as to how you would go about proceeding to get them set up.
Right, absolutely. And that's going to morph a little bit as we figure it out.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely. So here's a question for our legal beagle today, please. I know we're not allowed to have board meetings remotely. Can you have committee meetings remotely? No? Okay.
I don't think you guys have a separate schedule.
No, they're public meetings just like this, just like the board meeting. It's public in here, broadcast on YouTube, the whole 9 yards.
I was just thinking in terms of making it easy to get together rather.
Sure.
than-
Oh,
What
I-
size what is the size of the committee that has to be?
you couldn't go more than 4 because then you have a quorum of the board. So it'd be 4.
Even if there's only a committee of 2, it still has to be, it's a public meeting.
Yeah.
Committee itself.
Gotcha.
So- I mean, I guess. Even if you have one.
Okay.
So-
Okay, just that's a good clarification.
And that's,
Good.
well, and that's something to think about. If let's say there was a committee of 3, if it was Lane, Gary and Chuck and Gary couldn't have breakfast together because that would be a committee meeting. So it isn't, as long as you have to have a public meeting notice that you're meeting at the Sunnyside for an omelet or something, but and the hard part about then phone calls are included, text messages, emails, it gets, I don't want to use the word messy, but it becomes very restrictive. And so it's important to think about, I think my recommendation to Brian was that you do committees of 4, because then you'd have the ability to have 2 people go to breakfast and not create a quorum.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
They always work committees, as your 4 members.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're gonna have 2 committees, you have committees of 4, and then the president is not on one, was the way we talked about it originally. Obviously, this is the board's decision, not mine, but I was trying to think of a way to make it not onerous for, if Gary wanted to call Chuck and ask him a question, to not think to myself, oh, did I just violate Ohio open meetings laws by having a conversation with Chuck? I wouldn't want board members to be accidentally put in that position. I want to protect you from that kind of thing. So just something to think about.
So we have our committee of 4 and we go out to breakfast. And we say, Ben, come along. at The last minute.
Yeah.
Or do you? Is
I don't-
he not
I don't-
Part of the sunshine issue?
I don't think so.
No. Right.
No. You're not actually technically, are you technically part of this committee?
No.
Okay.
No.
So no.
Okay.
Yeah. It would only be board members you'd have to be concerned about. You could have any number of staff. And it was
Secretary treasurer of the board.
That's. Which is very important.
Okay,
Got it.
great. Okay, well, then I guess,
Would you be recommending that a committee be formed to address this?
Brian is gonna spit right back at us that that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, if that's his appointment and his definition, then for the purpose of the committee, I'm okay with that too.
Well, my sense is that we are either relatively ambivalent towards it, but not against it. If I'm reading the comments correctly, to yes, we think it's the way we ought to go. So it ought to be presented to the board that we discussed it and that we believe that we ought to take the next step in terms of follow up and look at developing 2 standing committees, operations, finance, and the potential to have ad hoc committees that are called when required to handle special issues.
That was already in the bylaws.
That should be, described in the bylaws.
Right. That all ought to go into the bylaws, correct?
Right.
I think part of that too, Gary, would be maybe in part of the process, but to set up the procedure of how to well define what those committees, ad hoc committees would be and what their charge would be.
And also what departments they're assigned to, so everyone's clear on that.
Well, I'm thinking of the building one. If you say you wanted to set up a committee that was going to track change orders for the new building, there'd have to be some really clear definition of what that committee's purpose really was. Yeah, so that you don't get necessarily outside of that committee. That's my opinion, and that's how I would approach it. But
That makes sense. Otherwise you get mission creep.
exactly.
I agree.
And also scope creep if you don't be careful. That's it.
Can't have that.
That's right.
Okay.
Mr. Zibble,
Yes.
as the example you just used, just one off the top of your head, or do you envision a committee?
That was just one off the top of my head.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, no, I'm not, I wouldn't be professing that.
If we get in down into that much minutia, I think we're defeating the purpose of two standing committees.
Well, part of the purpose there, Donna, was to also say, what is the purpose? How far are you going to go into the minutia? You know, if you just tell them it's going to be reported and you're going to ask the questions before the board meeting. So when you go to the board meeting, you can say everything looks in order, or there's something out of order on this. That's the definition of it, not saying you have to sit there and approve them. It might even be something in the job description that says no approval authority is granted to this committee.
No, there was no approval authority in the past other than a recommendation to move forward on a certain, like, for example, in the finance committee, budget committees thoroughly reviewed this with the CEO and finance and whoever else would be necessary. And it's our recommendation to the board that the budget go forward.
Mhm. Sure, that would be a typical kind of result in my mind anyway.
Right.
That's a historic kind of result.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, good. Appreciate the time on this. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, hearing none. Any old business that we need to discuss? New business? If not, may I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second,
Trudy?
Back to me.
Yes.
Sheets. Swanson,
Yes.
Zibble.
yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Gary.